Let's understand what is balancing an account. So what is balance first of all? From the ledger point of view, what is balance? Balance is nothing but a difference between the debits and credits in the ledger. When you do the posting in a ledger, many accounts will have entries on the debit side as well as on the credit side. So the net result between this debit and credit is called the balance in the account. Okay, so the net result between the debit and credit. So balancing means writing of the difference between the amount columns of two sides. So I'll write it here. Balancing means writing the difference between the amount columns of the two sides in the lighter side, that is in the side where you have a less total. Okay, so I'll repeat, balancing means writing of the difference between the amount columns of the two sides in the lighter side or the smaller total side so that the grand totals are equal. This is more important because when you prepare a ledger, say particular account, X account, you are going to have some entries on the debit and you are going to have some entries on the credit. Say for example, the entries on the debit total is more and entries on the credit total is less. Then you cannot have more total here and you cannot have less total here. Actually, the total should be equal on both sides. The total should be equal on both sides. So what you should do? Here you have more, right, on the debit. On the credit you have less. So there is a difference, and that difference you have to write, and that is called balancing. So in that way your total on both sides become equal. So what is the significance of balancing? There are three possible balances. Okay, the first one could be the debit balance, what you are seeing. I'll explain. So there are basically three possibilities while balancing an account in a given period. It can be a debit balance, or it can be a credit balance, or it can be a nil balance also. So it can be debit, it can be credit, it can be nil balance also. So what is this debit balance? That we have to understand. What is this debit balance? When you have more items on the debit, look at this cash account, you have debit side and credit side. When you have more total on the debit side, here you have two entries, 15,000 and 4,000, that is 19,000. Whereas on the credit side you have only two entries. On debit also you have only two, on credit you have two, but the total makes up only to 10,500, whereas here the total is 19,000. So on the debit side your total is high, whereas on the credit side your total is less. So your debit balance or your debit total is greater than, I would say your debit total is greater than credit total. Then that account is said to have debit balance. When your debit total is greater than credit total, then that account is said to have debit balance. Say take an account where there will be only debit entries, then that account will have only debit balances. Okay, so in this case, what is the procedure for arriving at the balance? First, what you have to do is you have to total the higher side. Total higher side. In this case, on the debit side you have the higher total 19,000. On the credit side, if you total, it gets only 10,500, whereas the higher side total is 19,000. So find the difference between these two, 19,000 and 10,500, and the difference works out to 8,500. Write the difference on the credit side because only the credit side is short of money, right? Short of amount. So on the credit side, write by balance carry down on the closing date. Here the closing date is 31st. So by balance carry down 8,500. So on the credit side also now total is 19,000, which matches with the total on the debit side. Then what you have to do in the next year or in the next accounting period, this cash account should be opened. When it is opened, it will have a opening balance, right? It will have a opening balance. So what is the opening balance in the next accounting period? It is nothing but closing balance of the previous accounting period will become the opening balance in the next accounting period. In the previous accounting period, what was the closing balance? In the previous accounting period, the closing balance carried down is 8,500. So that is going to become the opening balance on 1st April. We write to balance brought down 8,500. So when your closing balance is on credit, opening balance will be on debit. If your closing balance is going to be on debit, opening will be on credit. So this is the structure which we have to follow. So the significance of balancing, the first one is when you have debit balance. So when you close it on the credit side, meaning your debit is greater than credit, when you open that account next year, the opening balance will have debit balance, right? That's why we call it as debit balance. The second possible scenario can be account having a credit balance. So when does an account will have a credit balance? When your total on credit side, right, is greater than the total on the debit side. When your total on the credit side is greater than the total on the debit side, then in that case that account will have a credit balance. Look at here, you have this capital account. Capital account by very nature is a liability. It will have more entries on the credit. So on the credit side, you have entry on 1st April 2003, buy cash 50,000. And on the debit side, you don't find any other entry. So on credit you have one single entry, on debit you don't find any other entry. So your total on credit side is high, it is 50,000. On debit you don't find any transaction, no transaction, right? So your credit side total is 50,000, debit side it is nil. So if you want to balance and close this ledger, you should park this balance on the debit side. So I'm writing on the year end, that is 2004 March 31, to balance carry down 50,000. So in this way the total of credit is equal to total of debit. Now this is the closing balance of capital account in the year end, and this would become the opening balance in the next financial year. And here we have written on the debit side as a balance, and in the next year when it is written on the opening, okay, it will find place on the credit side by balance brought down 50,000. So this is the case where you have a significant credit balance. The third significance of balancing can be nil balance. That is, that particular account will not give you any balance, and this can happen when the total of debit is equal to total of credit. So when the total of debits and credits are equal, it is closed by merely writing the total on both sides. Here if you look at this account, Shankar account, the total on credit side is 6,000. Total on debit side is also 6,000. It means this account does not have any balance. It indicates equality of benefits received and given by the account.